before there were maps, before Google Earth, and long before we ever dreamed of landing on the moon, there were the stars. But did you know that while we all look at the same night sky, we don't see the same story? Some saw gods, others saw ancestors, some saw fate, and others saw freedom. What if I told you the stars above you right now, this very second, are part of stories thousands of years old? And in some cultures, those stories still shape life, love, war, and destiny. So pack your bags, guys. This isn't just a journey across countries. It's a journey across myth, memory, and the mysteries above. Today, let's talk about how did the stars shape humanity and how are they still shaping us today. This video is going to be a little bit different from my normal travel videos, but as many of you probably already know, I am getting my master's in space studies right now with an emphasis on astronomy. I love the stars. I think they're beautiful. I think they tell us a story. I think the stars connect us to our ancestors and connect us to one another. There's deep psychological impact that the universe has on us. I think it was Carl Sagan that said, we all come from stardust. We are all stardust. The very atoms within us are millions of years old from the stars. It's such a beautiful thing to think about. We're all connected in some way. The myths from the stars, the myths from the galaxies throughout time tell us a story about who we are, about where we came from, and even where we're going. So today, it's not going to be a normal travel video. We're going to travel across different countries, but we're also going to travel through time and see what the ancient people have said about those beautiful things up in the sky that we like to stare at night, and those things that make us wonder who we are. It makes us realize how small we are, and it makes us see how beautiful the universe is. Let's talk about the Navajo Native Americans, and we can call this kind of the path of the holy people. In Navajo cosmology, the stars weren't just decorations, they were living spirits. The holy people placed constellations to protect the earth and guide harmony and balance. They saw the stars as spirits that protect them. And they even thought that some were evil. There were some stars, constellations that they found were evil. This helped them to try and figure out the best times of the year, plant their crops, or to navigate the earth. That's the biggest thing that stars were able to do. They were able to help navigate and guide Native Americans or guide anyone in the ancient world. That helped to guide them to where they needed to go. They had these ideas like there were the stars like the fireplace constellation, which they used to help with healing ceremonies. This was a primitive form of like doctors, what we would call witch doctors. Here in the Philippines, there still are witch doctors. My fiance's mom, she is what we would call in America a witch doctor. I don't know what they call them here. And I didn't know that that's what my fiance was talking about until she was telling me what her mom did. We were with her aunt, and I kept saying, I have no idea what that means. And her aunt says, oh, in English, that means witch doctor. So her aunt knew. She didn't. Her aunt is a very smart woman, by the way. And her aunt has a daughter. That little girl's English is absolutely amazing. Her English, I swear, is better than her Bisaya. It may not be better than her Bisaya, but it is definitely better than her Tagalog. Her English is superb. I've never met a 4-year-old who could speak English that good. Even American toddlers at 4 years old, some of them have trouble speaking English as good as this little girl does. But she told me that what my fiance's mom is a witch doctor. And my fiance's been to one too. One that actually did this stuff for free, but she did some chants and some other stuff. I didn't go in. I don't think anyone was allowed in while she did it. And it's very odd to us, these healing ceremonies. But that was a way that, especially in the ancient times, people tried to heal sicknesses. There's the debate over whether it worked or not. There could have been a placebo effect as well. The placebo effect is when you think something works, and because you think it works, it gets into your head that it is working, and you have the same effect, which is interesting. It's an interesting thing. We use it a lot when we test medicines, actually. But anyhow, they also saw the Milky Way as a pathway of the spirits where souls travel after death. They believe that once you died, the Milky Way is where your soul will go. It leads you to wherever you will be going afterward. I find that beautiful. I find that an interesting take. I find that a way to view the world that I like. I like it. There's a lot of beauty to it. Some of it reminds me of some occult beliefs. I studied the occult for a while, and a lot of them tied the stars and the universe into the mind of the person. So it kind of reminds me of that a little bit. And the Navajo, they didn't name the Big Dipper, but they described its function. It was used in medicine and seasonal rituals. If you think about it, like the Big Dipper, it makes sense it would be called something like that. Even though they didn't name it, they still saw the Big Dipper. And the medicine, you take it out of a bucket or out of something and you drink it. So it's kind of like a cup, almost like what a dipper would be. Have you ever stared at the stars and wondered maybe someone is watching? Not in a bad way, or maybe in a bad way, but I would say not in a bad way, but in a way that lets you know that you're not alone, that someone is always there to be with you. And then let's look at the ancient Egyptians and this afterlife highway, I guess we can call it. To the ancient Egyptians, stars were divine. The night sky, that was the domain of Osiris, the god of the dead. And pyramids weren't just tombs, they were launch pads for the soul. I don't know how much y'all know about ancient Egyptian mythology. You can almost think of it like Christianity, but Osiris is the father, Horus is the son. There's the myth that Osiris is killed by Set, which is an evil god, and Horus and Isis, Horus is his son and Isis was his wife, they resurrect Osiris. And it goes through these seasons through the year where there's the season of drought, which would be like the death of Osiris, and then when the season of harvest comes, it's like the resurrection of Osiris. So the stars and the seasons at that time helped the ancient Egyptians understand when it was time to harvest and when it was time to wait and have to hold as much food as they can. And of course, obviously, you guys know about the Great Pyramids, or all the pyramids. The belief is that the pyramids, shaped the way they are, help the soul get to heaven. There's of course conspiracies now over what all that means, and there are people who say that the ancient civilizations, blah, 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 blah. I don't buy into that, or I believe exactly what history has shown to be true, and that is that the pyramids were created to help pharaohs, and I think their family might have been buried in there too. It helps their soul go to heaven. So like the shafts of the Great Pyramids, they aligned with Orion's belt, which is another star constellation. And then the journey of the pharaoh to the stars was part of becoming a god. I don't know if the earliest Egyptians believed it, but as the mythology started to bloom and started to grow more, they started to believe that Pharaoh was divine and that he was a reincarnation of Horus. So when Pharaoh dies, his soul becomes a god as he travels to the heavens. And Osiris's rising marked the flooding of the Nile, which is the heartbeat of Egypt. Did you know one of the brightest stars in the sky controlled the survival of an entire civilization? This Orion's belt, it helped keep the Egyptians alive and thriving the way they did. And then let's look at the Polynesians, the wayfinders of the stars, the ones who like to use boats, and they were masters of the sea. The Polynesians were able to cross entire oceans without compasses, not because they had a GPS and not because they had all these beautiful maps drawn, but because their sky was the real GPS. Their sky was their navigator. They were able to use advanced techniques. They would know where stars rise and where they set, and this would help them find different positions on directions they needed to go. It would help define east and west and north and south and the particular ways in between them. They memorized hundreds of stars, almost like those stars were like family, and they were able to memorize those, and because of that they could navigate the sea, and they could see all these beautiful things in the sky, and they would know where to go. because they had memorized it. They memorized where these stars come from, or they memorized where these stars started to rise, where they would fall, and what time of the year they would be out. So navigation became more than just some physical event. The navigation became a spiritual one that connected their people to their ancestors through these celestial paths. The stars in the sky to them was much more than just stars that navigated through the ocean. These stars were able to connect them to the ancient ancestors that they held in deep respect. Polynesians were some of the best people at navigating the sea and the ocean. And that's what they used the stars for. They used it for that. It also reminds me of that clip I saw of Neil Tyson where he was talking about the Titanic. And when he first saw the movie, he said, we know where the Titanic sank. We know what time of night it sank. We know what the stars would have looked like. And he actually told James Cameron when the movie originally came out that this is not what the night sky looked like. And so James Cameron, to his credit, went back, and when they did like a remaster of the movie, they fixed what the sky looked like. They made sure that it looked exactly like it would have looked the night that the Titanic sank. That's kind of what the Polynesians would have been like. And then what about the Chinese? In Imperial China, the stars were a mirror of the empire. The heavens were seen like a court, with kings, advisors, and battles playing out among the constellations. They saw history. They saw civilization. They didn't just see the stars. They didn't just use the stars for navigation or see the stars as gods and goddesses. They saw their very civilization of mankind within the stars. The Big Dipper was called the Northern Dipper, and it was the central part of the imperial rituals. This is what they used to be able to do rituals within their empire. And astronomers were court officials. Sometimes they would think that eclipses were omens of political change. They would see the stars as being able to affect what was going on in their daily lives. It's like almost like astrology, which y'all know how I feel about astrology. I don't like astrology. I think it's a bunch of BS. But in the ancient time, that's all they had. That's all they could do. They didn't have the modern technology like we have. So in their mind, these stars in the sky, these beautiful things in the heavens, not just the stars, but the moon and the planets, all of it, would in some way affect their country. And then they had 28 lunar mansions, which tracked the moon's path. And that was tied to agriculture and fate. They felt the moon had some kind of effect on their life, on the life of all the people in China, that it could affect their fate with lunar eclipses and solar eclipses, and that how the moon moved around and how the stars moved around. That also affected their agriculture. They were able to know when was a good time for the good harvest of the year and when it's time to stop harvesting. This was all tracked by the moon and by the stars and by the sun, which is something we don't do anymore. We don't need to, but our ancestors, they did it. That's the only way they could do it. In ancient China, a solar eclipse could dethrone an emperor, could completely get rid of an emperor if a solar eclipse happened, because they thought that it was a bad omen. What would your government do if the stars said that they were doomed? What do you think? What would your government do? I would say nowadays they'd probably want to hold on to that power as long as possible. Anyhow, let's look at the Greeks and what they saw as stories in the sky. Greek astronomy was mythology in motion. Every constellation was a warning, a lesson, or a legacy. Orion, he was the hunter who slayed the scorpion. They saw the stars as messages from the gods, stories that the gods were telling them that had happened in the past, or maybe it's still happening, or at least that's what they thought. It was still happening, or it happened in the past, or it could happen in the future. And Orion was one who killed the scorpion. The scorpion, the evil one, I couldn't tell you everything about that whole story. The most of what I know about Greek mythology is about some of the major gods and goddesses. I love Ares and Artemis, Zeus, all those great ones. But they thought the stars taught morals and entertained the philosophers. They didn't just see the stars as something for agriculture. They didn't just see it as something to travel. They didn't see it as spirits in the sky. They saw stars as stories that taught morals on ways they should behave in life, the ways they should act and portray themselves to other people. And the philosophers, they loved the stars in Greek mythology. They used stars to come up with some of their They used stars to come up with some of their philosophical ideas. If your life became a constellation, what would the stars say about you? That's a good one, actually. Leave that in the comments. Tell us, what would the stars say about your life if it was a constellation? Then let's look at the indigenous Australians and how they saw the sky. Instead of looking at stars, the Australians looked at the spaces between. They found meaning in the void. It wasn't just the stars, but they found meaning in the void of the stars. The emu in the sky is formed from the dark patches of the Milky Way. And these sky stories connect to a dream time, a creation era, ceremonies aligned with stellar movements. They didn't just see the stars, they saw what was in between the stars. They saw the space, what we now call, a lot of that would be dark matter. That's something you don't hear a lot about, actually. You don't hear civilizations in the ancient time talk about what's in between the stars, this empty matter. But for some reason, the Australians did. What they found is that it taught them lessons of life. It connected them to some kind of creation of the earth, of the universe, of the Milky Way, whatever. It brought knowledge about creation. Not all knowledge comes from the stars. Sometimes it comes from the space in between. There's a famous photo now of just this big black void in space. I think it's hundreds of light years across. We don't know why it's like that. We have no clue. All the galaxies around it, we have no idea why it's there. It's the only place in the universe like that. We have no clue why. And sometimes the knowledge we need comes from that type of area, the void in the space. And then let's look at the Mayans and the cosmic timekeeping. To the Mayans, the stars were measured time. Their calendar systems were so precise, they predicted eclipses centuries in advance. Y'all know about that Mayan calendar, don't you? Y'all know about that fear people had back in 2012. The end of the Mayan calendar, the end of life. A bunch of BS, of course, not the end of life. It was just the end of their calendar year. It's where their calendars ended. If they were still alive today, they would just remake the calendars. But they were so good at making these calendars that they were able to predict eclipses centuries in advance. That's huge. That's amazing. At that time, with such a primitive nation, to be able to understand the stars and the universe like that, that's absolutely amazing. I feel like most of the time, we can't even do what they've done. We can't even predict the stuff that they've predicted. But they did not predict the end of the world. The end of their calendar was not the end of civilization. It was not the end of the world. It was just the end of their calendar. They would have needed to be alive to do it again. They saw Venus as a war goddess. Its rise could signal bloodshed. Whereas Venus was the goddess of beauty in Greek mythology, or in Roman mythology, Aphrodite, Venus, and then Venus was a Roman one, Aphrodite was a Greek one. And Mars in Roman, Ares in Greek, was the war god. They saw Venus as the war goddess. Because Venus is a beautiful planet. If you ever get to see it, Venus is the closest planet in our solar system to the same mass as Earth, I think. It's also, at times, it is the closest planet to the Earth. It could be quicker to get to Venus than Mars. Now, there's a lot of other issues that come with Venus that we would have to deal with. Venus is a hellhole. It's hot. Volcanoes. I don't think there's any plate tectonics like there is on Earth. The atmosphere is filled with sulfur and CO2. The pressure would crush you on its surface. The heat would melt you. I mean, you just would not survive on Venus for not even a second. You'd survive less than a second on Venus. I did write a paper, though. It was my final paper before I got my bachelor's on colonizing Venus. We'll have to upgrade our technology quite a bit because it would be living in the skies, in the clouds. Cloud City. Star Wars, anyone? Cloud City of Venus. Because the air pressure is about the same as Earth around that point, and the temperature is about the same. But it would take a lot of work. I think we could do it, but it would take a lot of work. Venus is my favorite planet, guys, just so y'all know. Or the Russians sent probes to Venus back in the 70s, I think it was. It might have been the 80s, but I think it was the 70s. And they lasted, at most, it was a couple hours, and the pressure and the heat just crushed them. Well, we got a few pictures. They're not the best pictures, but we got a few pictures, and it shows just how brutal Venus is. And it makes sense. There you go. The Mayans saw it. Venus is a brutal planet, and I guess the Mayans saw that. They didn't think beauty. They thought war. I think both. I think Venus is a beautiful planet, but I think it's a brutal planet. So, maybe it's a little bit of a war goddess and a beauty goddess. Who knows? Getting back on the topic. Sorry, guys. You know how I love space. Getting back on topic, though. They also saw the moon's movement as something that would decide when to harvest and when to have ceremony dates. Or not the moon, the sun. So it helped them bring forth a harvest and when to not worry about the harvest and when to focus on ceremonies. The sun helped with that. So for them, astronomy equaled survival plus prophecy. That's exactly what astronomy was to them. What would your day look like if you had to trust the sky to tell you when to plant, fight, or pray? Would you be able to do it? I mean, I think that would be hard. Personally, I think it would be hard to depend on the planets and the stars to decide that, especially now with our modern technology. You know, we got clocks and phones and computers and everything else. I guess actually some religions still do it. I know Muslims will pray at sundown, I think, or sunset. I remember working at Walmart with Muslims who did that. I find very, very devout. I think it's so devout when people do that. But that's not me. I can't do that, I guess. It's hard for me to focus if I don't have an actual set time. What can we learn from this? Across the globe, from tribes of Africa to the temples of Asia, from native lands in America to islands in the Pacific, one thing becomes clear, and that's that humans didn't just gaze at stars for science. We looked to them for meaning. The stars in the sky gave us meaning. It gave us a reason to go on. It gave us a reason to live and to survive, and not just do that, but to thrive while we're doing it. Stars gave hope to those who may felt hopeless, because life, especially for ancients, was not easy. Everybody glorifies how great life was for the ancients, and it was not. What you see in Hollywood is not exactly how life was. Life was brutal. It was hard. And the stars gave people hope. The stars gave people peace. And what they saw, they used for stories to tell their children, morals, to tell their children, to teach their children, to teach their people when they should harvest and how they should harvest and what ceremonies they should do, where they should go if they're on a boat or if they're just traveling across the desert. The stars guided them, gave them that peace of mind. You see, they were used for this navigation. They were used to connect people to gods and to fate, and to connect people with cycles. The stars marked the rhythm of life for them, and we are connected to them. They are our ancestors. In some psychological way, there's this collective unconsciousness, which you could kind of tie back to evolution as well, but this collective unconsciousness that all of humanity that has ever lived, all of humanity that lives now, and all of humanity that will ever live, all of our minds are part of that collective mind that connects us together. And the stars are a huge part of that connection. That's why we still look up in the night sky. Even with all of our technology, we still look up at the night sky. We're just awestruck of what we see. All the science in the world will never change that, because that's who we are as people. That's how we're connected with one another. You know, and maybe, just maybe, that's because we need something bigger than ourselves. We need something to make sense of death, of destiny, and of dreams. And stars can give that to us. Our ancient ancestors saw that. They saw something in the stars. And we are to the point now that we don't use the stars the way they did. And rightly so. We don't need it for navigation. We don't need it for harvesting. And some might say we don't need it for healing or for ceremonies. But we still need it. There's still that hope in the stars. There's still those quotes that say things like, shoot for the stars so you can at least land somewhere, something like that. Shoot for the stars. Do that. Go higher than yourself. We're so insignificant if you think about it. This universe is huge. All the constellations we see are all in the Milky Way. That's just our galaxy. That's it. There's billions more stars in the whole universe. Think about that. It makes us seem so small in comparison. But at the same time, it makes us seem so great because we have the ability to look up at those stars and to see something that not many other creatures can see. We don't know any planets that have life at all on them, but Earth does. And that should tell you something, that even though we're small, we're still great. Our ancestors saw it. For some reason, our current civilization, they don't see it. I don't know why, but I see both. I don't see one or the other. So tonight, guys, just take a moment, go outside, look up and ask yourself, what stories have you forgotten? What journeys lie ahead? What wisdom is waiting above you? All those stories from the ancients. They're still part of us. Every one of them, still part of us. We just have to tap back into who we are as a human race. We have to tap back into that unconscious part of all of humanity, a one mind that connects us all. Guys, what's the most meaningful thing you've ever felt while looking at the stars? Leave it in a comment below. Let us know. What's the most meaningful thing you've ever felt while looking at the stars? I'm genuinely curious. I read every comment, and I love comments about religion, philosophy, politics, and stars. I mean, that's what I'm getting my master's in. So let us know. And guys, if you like this video, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Like this video if you've ever stared at the sky and you've wondered if someone else somewhere is staring back, and subscribe for more deep dives into wonders of our world and beyond. I try to make videos every Monday through Friday, and I will do more with astronomy as well. I've got a planner of different videos. This is just one of them, but it's one that I really enjoyed making because one of my favorite classes, even right now, because now I'm taking another history of astronomy class for my master's, is learning about the ancient culture and their ideas on what the stars meant and astronomy. Remember, guys, we're not just traveling the world, we're traveling through time, through myths and through memories, the memories of our ancestors. And this journey, it's only just begun. Know that you guys are valuable and that you matter. God bless and peace.